Great, thanks. So my name's PJ Dapke. I'm a lifelong Riverside resident. I did move away briefly, lived in Boston and New York City, and came back to here. So I grew up in the area. I grew up driving by the Plattwater schools my whole life to get to other places like the Dairy Bee, in what's now I still drive by them every day to go to Borealis. I think for me, I've done a lot of involvement with Dr. Alan Diallo and some of my other neighbors, restoring Grassy Plains Park with the cooperation of the city planning and mayor's office. It's been fantastic. I think when I first heard about this opportunity, what stuck with me was I think anytime we can offer something unique and different from our community that's more than just off the shelf box row houses that don't have that look and feel, I think it struck me as a really unique opportunity. And if you think about, for me, I think about Rumford Mills, I think about Hope in Maine. I see other interesting spaces that are very much like this one that can be repurposed in a way that brings different opportunities for people in Riverside. We all know there's a housing shortage. Um, there's a lot of senior citizens in East Providence in general, and I think uh, something different than just the standard out of the box home is something that I think a lot of younger people would be interested in. Professionals without children, stuff like that. I think a lot of times it's overlooked that there's a market of people that would be interested in living not necessarily in the city, a condo lifestyle, but someplace a little further out that's central to amenities. And I think starting to build those hubs of that wheel to make Riverside Square a little bit more focused is a critical path item, and it would be a shame to lose the opportunity, I think, is the way I feel about it. Especially if you think about uh, how well Warren has done. And for me, it's, how can we be as good as Warren? How do we utilize our resources so that our central bike path access, our shops, our community can grow kind of spiraling outward from our best resources? So to me, it's an opportunity cost where we have a rare opportunity to provide some density and some interesting new ways to live against what we already have an abundance of. So I hope that's helpful. And I think it's at least worth a second look to understand the economics a little better. The building's been empty for a while, so I think if we pause, it allows everyone to understand. Okay, here's what the actual options are. Because I think, in light of some of the other community activism around open spaces here, all discussions have been blurred. So I think it's worth looking at. Yeah, I think clear milestones are the biggest part, which is why I think a pause to demolishing the buildings would be useful. I think what happens is there's this idea that there is a secret plan set in place that is, immovable, and that it absolutely is going to happen. And I think that's not the case necessarily. So, for example, I don't know that a developer has been chosen who has already laid out a plan for what happens if those buildings get knocked down. So to me, it's a bit incremental. So I think clear milestones that are easily shareable with the community make everybody feel bought in, right? Because if people feel like, well, they know the ubiquitous they. So what I hear all the time when I work with stakeholders who like me and who hate me is they, and it's pretty easy to become the evil they. And the reality is everyone's juggling multiple projects with competing priorities. So everyone's just doing their best, but it becomes part of this nefarious plan for the people who are, passionate about an issue. And I think the reality is it's not a nefarious plan. It's, let's just set some clear milestones and goals. It says, look at it by this date, understand development opportunities by this date, and then have a decision made by the executive with regular feedback at this date. Because I think I don't know that that's happened. No, I mean, look, I think we've got some interesting opportunities and challenges down there. So it feels like this might be some low hanging fruit to start the momentum the right way. There's some derelict buildings. And I think I'll say this, look at Kettle Point. Every time I hear about the schools bursting at the seams, we're putting 19 houses next to my house. So let's not pretend that doing condos instead of row houses is somehow going to impact the housing. We need families in Riverside, and to tether every development conversation around this boogeyman of too much traffic or schools can't handle it. It's not really borne out to bear in my experience with what I've seen happen here.
My name is Ned Connors. I'm an historical preservation consultant and was also a chair of the East Providence Historic District Commission. And I live in Riverside, just a few blocks from Platte Waters. My concern as a stakeholder is twofold. First of all, I have seen in my years in development process and the use of the historical preservation tax credit as an incentive to historic rehab as opposed to demolition. I've seen a very wide range of buildings that were in, some of them in absolutely derelict condition, repaired and rehabbed, and now vital cogs in the whole neighborhood process. Royal Mill in West Warwick is a very good example, or the plant over on Valley Street. That these are very well built buildings and have incredible latitude for all kinds of different reuses. To continue on this thread of the historical preservation tax credit, I worked with the city over 2 consecutive granting cycles over the last 2 years to encourage the planning department to submit what's called a CLG grant to the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, which is our state historical preservation office, to do an analysis of Platte Waters for their potential National Register eligibility. And the commission looked kindly on it and actually accepted our grant proposal and had the money poised to give to us. The commission felt that Platte Waters were definitely National Register eligible, and that they just simply needed the documentation to substantiate that. It's never 100% until a decision has actually been rendered, but all of the signs were very, very good. And on 2 separate occasions, the city of East Providence pulled at the last minute the application to the State Preservation Office, which short-circuited any prospect of getting the buildings listed on the National Register. And once they're listed, they would be eligible for a 20% tax credit, a National Park Service tax credit for a whole range of rehab costs. And that is a real serious incentive for development. Now that development, that incentive doesn't exist for the fact that the city froze the process of getting the buildings evaluated for National Register status. Oh, it has a tremendous impact. These things, I mean, like look at Hope in Maine and Warren. There was a school of almost the exact same vintage as Platte. And you imagine trying to pitch the idea in Warren right now, let's tear down Hope in Maine. It's an incredible incubator for, you know, people going into the culinary arts. It has a community function. It has a farmer's market out back. Warren couldn't imagine life without Hope in Maine right now. And yet there was probably a substantial argument to demolish that building too, because we don't know what to do with it. Well, thank God somebody did have some ideas what to do with it. The second point I'd like to make has to do with a much more procedural. Because Platte Waters are potentially eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, the city of East Providence was required to send a letter to the State Preservation Commission stating their intentions because they were planning to use municipal funds for what National Park Service calls an adverse effect upon either National Register listed or potentially eligible structure. And on December 3rd, the planning department, it was requested from them by the commission that they send this letter stating East Providence's plans, which at that point was for demolition. And once the commission received it, they require a 30-day period for internal review to evaluate the National Register eligibility of Platte Waters, render a decision, and return that decision to the city of East Providence. And that was December 3rd. And to date, no letter has come from the city of Providence to the Preservation Commission stating what they intend to do here. And what that 30-day window it would give Platte Waters a 30-day window where demolition was stayed and give the commission the time to do an evaluation. And as I said, nothing has been done. And this is a requirement of state law. It's not a friendly suggestion. This is in state law. And East Providence has ignored that state law.
My name is Dr. Alan Diello. I'm a lifelong Riverside resident, save 10 years that I lived outside of the country. I come to the table tonight because I believe in community building, and I also believe in public spaces. A lot of my PhD research was on how people communicate in public spaces. So I have a fairly intimate background in how people use space within communities. And I was also particularly looking at how people do that in this digital age that we're in. And one of the points that I focused on is Riverside Square is the center of community. It's literally a crossroads, but it's also figuratively a crossroads. And in all the different things that I've gotten myself into within East Providence, all the different areas that I'm interested in, they all have a community element of some sort involved. And Riverside Square to me is the hub of that sort of image. And my biggest concern with how this process is transpiring with the Platt Waters buildings is that we're removing a large portion of what made that community center operate without really any game plan on how we're going to proceed, particularly because, as has been pointed out by others, there's no developers on line for developing these properties if the buildings are removed. And we're removing a historic property from consideration, again, without a fully vetted process. And to me, it's an act of cultural and community destruction, because any process that would bring this building back into use would, the buildings, I should say, will allow for something, as PJ mentioned, something a little different in the neighborhood. It will also bring forth a sort of vibrancy that just repetitive row houses of single family dwellings won't bring to the area. And there's also a very good possibility that this will create more community space within the neighborhood fabric without disturbing the neighborhood fabric. And it would be another asset that would help to create this nucleus of community through Riverside Square. So to me, it feels like with these different options on the table that have been pointed out that were not fully explored, that we should be taking a pause to say, wait a minute, let's take one last look before we fully commit to this process that will lead us towards, just a repetition of block after block of, single family housing, when there are other options that could help to strengthen the community atmosphere that this neighborhood has had in the past and is beginning to develop again with the renovation works that are going on in the square. That's my primary concern with this. Oh, absolutely. We don't live in a world where people are sitting on their front porches anymore. A point that was made a few years ago is that the community around Riverside Square was not a community of cars. It was a community of people that walked back and forth to the railroad station, the trolley station that was in the square, and then later bus. And that you had a sense of people interacting and moving within the community. After World War II, we moved into this building cycle based on the Levittown ideal, where we were building out these large communities, giving everyone their square, their quarter acre of grass. And those communities were built for example, automobile use. we don't even, where I am, we don't even have sidewalks. We don't have sidewalks where we are. And one of the problems with Grassy Plains Park is it's a park that was built for people to be able to walk to, but literally there are no sidewalks that will get you there. And there's a road that the main road that it's on became a main road, even though it was built as a side street. So these are problems that suburbia in some ways has brought on that Riverside Square doesn't have. Riverside Square is a walkable area, and it's become much more since the success of the bike path. It's also become more of a destination because of businessmen who were thinking beyond, for example, the old model. You have a lot of Riverside locals that say, oh, I wish we still had the Rexall on the corner of Lincoln and Bullocks Point. Oh, I wish the shoe shop was still in the Buckets building. And but what we instead have in the square is we have a coffee roaster. We have 2 very good restaurants, as well as several that are a little bit further beyond. We have service industries in the square. And we also have community building exercises that are fit for the 21st century, not fit for the 18th, 19th, and 20th. And one of the things that has also kept Riverside Square going is the fact that we didn't have a 1960s urban renewal plow all those buildings down and put up cookie cutter buildings. To lose the Platt and Waters buildings is to lose more of that fabric that gives Riverside Square some sort of community interest. It also removes a community nexus. And that's what I guess, to contrast the two areas, we're working on Grassy Plains in a way with almost a hand tied behind our back because of the way the neighborhood is laid out, that Riverside Square has going for it, and we want to maintain that.
And Al, if I can jump in on that, the other thing that's interesting, Rory, is at what Al and I have found is similar to other initiatives, there's always a very vocal minority of people that want absolutely no change. And
Yes.
those people get a lot of airtime. And I think what we've encountered in Grassy Plains as we've worked on it is that a lot of people are excited about change and new opportunities. And I think if it's clear what the opportunity is, people have a chance to absorb it differently. And that there's a lot of, and I would guess the Platt situation may be the same too. If it's clear that says it looks like this, it feels like this is how it changes your day, at least they can have an honest disagreement as opposed to the they again. For me, I'm always very honest about our intentions because there's a lot of bad actors that frankly wanted a private dog park, private backyard. And I said, look, and it's not just Alma, there's some other great guys in the neighborhoods that have done a lot of sweat on our efforts, but it's the same
Yes.
thing. It's here is what we want and here is why, and we want a functional place where every member of the community can go. So that's young kids to play, teenagers to have a place to run around and play ball, older people to picnic and, stretch out and just get out in the open air. And when you say, here's the 5 things we're really looking for, they're not that radical. Do you know what I mean? And then, there's always a problem. Like there are muggings in Central Park. If we fix Grassy Plains, that doesn't mean that there's going to be muggings in Grassy Plains. Like there's all sorts of corollaries that have, causation with, or you know what I mean? No association there. I'm using the wrong words, but, and it's the same thing I think you'd probably hear about a Platt development, which is, well, I don't want all these extra cars. Well, who's saying that it's, 50 units? I think it's being clear about, it's the net same number of cars, but now you've got an open space for the community and something that's a little different. And I think people assume a lot of layers of deep because of, a lot of jaded past actions.
I was going to say another thing that needs to be acknowledged along with what PJ just said is very simply, not 5 years ago, a plan was going to be ramrodded down the neighbors' throats before we had a strong mayor structure that clearly was overkill in that neighborhood that would bring up these concerns. So we already have a neighborhood that is on edge about these things for just this reason. They really are, what we saw at a couple of at the public meetings was a lot of people who were just very much, as PJ said, very conservative. I don't want to approach this, just tear it down. And, I found it very disheartening because I found that having grown up in East Providence, that's just a repetition of a cycle we've had for decades that I've seen across my whole life. And what I'm trying to say and why I got myself involved in this situation is we need to stop taking this approach of just because something happened badly X number of years ago, that every new project has to be resisted or every new idea has to be resisted, particularly an idea that literally would involve maintaining part of the community's historic fabric. Exactly what makes Riverside Square special had to do with those schools. There have been studies that have clearly shown that. And as I made a comment a while back at one of the meetings, I said, every time we've come to a crossroads in East Providence where we've had a study that recommends doing X and gives reasons for it, we go with the easier Y. And in this case, I strongly believe that we need a pause to basically say, look, we need to look at this one more time. There are things on the table that were not discussed, perhaps because the loudest voices were all that was being listened to. We did have, the middle of a pandemic. On the other hand, we need a pause and we need to say, wait a minute, let's look at this one last time to make sure that we are doing something that is positive for Riverside Square.
Yeah, actually, that I think what Alan said is, I guess I'll just start from the beginning. My name is Brian Dwiggins. I'm the owner of Borealis Coffee. We're in the depot, right in the heart of Riverside Square. And I think what has sort of drawn me into like the passion that several people have with this project is that whether you're very pro or very like against keeping these buildings, is that nobody really knows what the outcome is going to be if the buildings go away. So for me, I think it's really important that we do just sort of take a breath, and instead of just bringing in a wrecking ball and tearing these buildings down without knowing what the actual outcome could be, we need to make sure that the people that are in favor of tearing these buildings down actually know what the potential that they could be losing is. And so, whether it's, 8 house lots, 10 house lots, 12 house lots, or, a mixture of something like with multifamilies on there, or whether we keep both buildings and turn them into, whether one of them becomes a community center and some become condos in the other. There's just so many different variations that I don't think that conversation has had because of that. What happened a few years ago that Alan was talking about, where, there was this like really gung-ho plan that was put in place. It kind of shocked a lot of people, especially the abutting residents, that got them a really bad taste in their mouth. And when that all went south, now I think those residents really want to see something happen. And I think it's really easy to just say like, well, we'll just tear them down and we'll put some, we'll build some new houses and then we'll be out of the woods. But without an actual plan in place, like we're not going to be looking at new homes on those lots by the end of 2021. It's going to be several months of, remediation and rezoning and figure out how all the utilities are going to get in there. Like, is it going to be tearing up the roads multiple times every time we sell a house lot? Who is going to be, how are those house lots going to be sectioned out and sold? Are they going to be sold to individual home to people that are going to be responsible for building their own homes? Or is it going to be sold as a lot to one developer that's going to build a bunch of identical houses on the cheap in order to make, some less attractive homes, but in order that they can capitalize on their profits. So I think some of the character that comes from Riverside is because a lot of those homes, they were built by the people that originally lived in those homes. So they each have a very unique character. And I think we risk losing that character of Riverside if we don't actually know what we're voting for or against, or what is actually going to happen. I mean, so when I saw that the building was available, you know, we came and looked at it, and obviously like the charm and like there's so much history in the square and so much potential right there. You know, we got really excited, and obviously like being right on the bike path with the outdoor patio and having our own parking lot, and just, you know, it was like, it was a no-brainer for me for having a coffee shop there. But, you know, when we went and talked to the town, because I actually have a loan from the city of East Providence in order that we use for all the, you know, all the upgrades and the leaseholder improvements of the building. You know, as soon as we went in there, and I was like, hey, I'm looking at turning the depot into a coffee shop. Everybody that I talked to at city planning, they just like lit up. And we're like, oh my God, this is great. Like, that's what we want. We have so much excitement about Riverside Square and all these great plans on what is going to happen in Riverside. You know, we have this vacant lot that we're putting out to bid, and there are going to be like new construction and a bunch of stuff there. Guess what? That lot is still vacant. They have all these plans, and they were looking for grant money to renovate like the green belt right on the other side of the bike path from the cafe that goes up along the Dairy Bee. They have a plan in place on that, but that's still taking a while. And so that's, I guess, is another reason that I'm a little bit cautious of like, okay, we have a plan, but we don't actually have a plan. The plan is to tear the buildings down, but after that, we don't know what it is. So even when you have a plan, and you have different agencies involved, it's going to take a lot longer than we think. And I just don't want to be like staring at, you know, dirt lots again, and while we're waiting to figure out what they're actually going to do with them. You know, like one of our, you know, we have a couple little like brand values, and one of our brand values is that coffee is an experience worth sharing. And that, you know, so for me, like you know, a coffee shop is a place, it's a gathering place. And in my loan application to the city, I pitched the whole idea that, you know, coffee shops are more than just a place for you to like run in really quick and grab a cup of coffee and go on. It's a place for you to come in and gather and get to know your neighbors and really bring people together. And so anything that we can do to really preserve that like community aspect, and getting back again to like what Alan was saying, like, you know, by having these sort of like these nice beacons throughout the town, whether it's like if they decide to do these, you know, turn them into apartments or condos or whatever, like the Platte Water Schools could be like just continue to extend that like real community walkable vibe, that, you know, coffee is for me, like that's like what brings people together. But I think the schools could also be an opportunity. Does that make sense? I mean, like everybody that I'm looking back here, you know, I know on a fairly personal level from coming in and out of the cafe. And of course, I never would have met these people, even if I lived, you know, a few doors down from you, if we didn't have a coffee shop to come together and like exchange ideas and, you know, gripe about one thing or the other, or, you know, how's your day? Like, I know everybody here on a first name basis, and I know their drink orders, and that's a pretty cool thing. Like, with the depot, you know, it was really important to us to try to like bring it back to like what it historically was, when it was, you know, literally a place for people to come and go like for Riverside. So, you know, we took a few liberties, but you know, we basically took the building down to the original studs, and, you know, built, you know, from the outside in, and, you know, looked at old pictures of old railroad stations and stuff. That there's one in East Greenwich that we took some cues from, you know, with the wainscoting and like the rosettes over the doors and everything. And we try to keep the headers out, because that sort of adds to the, it's a really hard thing to explain, but like, yeah, like the physical space definitely makes a difference. And there's a reason that, you know, you go to, you know, if you go to like the North End in Boston, like for Italian meal, it feels very different than if you go, you know, to you know, the new Seaport district in Boston to go get, you know, a bowl of spaghetti. It's totally different vibe. Like the food might be comparably good, but there's just something different about it. I recommend everybody to come to Riverside because I like to have a lot of options. So like having a burrito place and a pizza place and Stevie D's and, you know, all these other places that are like hopefully would be coming in. It's really great to, like, you know, the more the merrier. And I think there is a lot of opportunity there because the people in Riverside are like, you know, they're very proud Riverside residents. They love their community. And that's one of the things that I think has helped make us modestly successful, is that, you know, they might not be like big coffee drinkers, but they love, you know, what we sort of represent. And that's like this, you know, the rising tide of all that, in all the potential that Riverside has.
Could I make just a comment to buttress something that Brian said? Riverside Square is where it is because of the railroad. It became a railroad stop. And that was something that was so poetic about Brian turning Depot community place, was because Cedar Grove was unviable as a seaside community because of the fact that there was a railroad stop. This was before the trolleys came along in the late 1890s and early 20th century. So there is something remarkable to me about the fact that here's something that speaks to the very reason Riverside Square exists as a social node. And it has become that again because of what Brian has done with Borealis.
All right, thank you. So I'm Jason Rafferty. I'm the director of the Riverside Renaissance Movement, a grassroots organization going through its 8th year of promoting our neighborhood of Riverside. I'm also a local resident living on Bluff Street. And there's a concerning pattern around development in Riverside and more broadly in East Providence, where the public is being excluded from the planning process. More specifically, we're being told to step back and let the experts tell us what's best for us and what we'd like. But people get tired of being told what they should like in their own community. In fact, there's been a history of it in Riverside. It came into play with the carousel in Crescent Park, which at one time was slated for deconstruction before a group of neighbors courageously stood up against all odds and saved an incredible resource for our community. With the Vamco site, the Riverside Renaissance Movement was actually established when a group of Riverside residents stood up and demanded that they be included in the planning process. Most recently, there's been concerns around the redevelopment of the Metacomet Golf Course, where community members are protesting and speaking out. And now it's the Plattwater School, the largest development parcel that's in direct proximity to Riverside Square and is vital to the development of our local economy. Rather than identifying a developer and working with them around the future of the site, we're proceeding with a vague plan and no developer identified before we start limiting our options. Yet again, there's a community dialogue taking place that's been hushed. Granted that public protest has become somewhat of a tradition in East Providence, but shouldn't have to come to this. It seems there's a fear towards community dialogue, public debate, and a tendency to target individuals over addressing the issues and viewpoints at hand. The Riverside Renaissance Movement operates from the perspective that sustainable revitalization of our community will come from within, that the involvement and interest of residents, businesses, and community organizations towards the community will move us forward. Don't get me wrong, people speaking out is a good thing, because it shows that people in Riverside care about their community. When we look at the revitalization of Riverside Square, much of that progress has been made through grassroots and local efforts. Residents of Riverside and the surrounding area have made significant contributions to improving the landscape, the buildings, and our sense of community. Personally, this is what I love about Riverside, people who care. But there needs to be a better way. There needs to be a master planning process, not just for the city, but for communities like Riverside and hubs like Riverside Square. We need to stop going one project to the next and making it up as we go. Second, residents, business owners, and local organizations need to be provided with a way to provide quality input into the planning process. Surveys and meetings of only a select few are not going to cut it. Finally, when projects like this come up, we have a defining impact on our community. We need to develop a better process for public education, engagement, and to make sure we're proceeding in a way that's thoughtful and impactful. I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to speak out. But I'm not here to advocate for a specific plan or process when it comes to Platte Waters. However, I support the position that we slow down on Platte Waters School before we start limiting our options. Let me remind people, we have another vacant lot in Riverside Square that we've been dealing with for years. Clearly, people speaking out means that there is a hunger for debate and a dedication to community development that we cannot push aside and label as opposition or nuisance. Let's have this debate. Let's give people a chance to speak up so that we can proceed in a way that is well thought out. Big picture, I call on our leaders to really consider our approach to community planning in our city and how we can improve it to foster collaboration and engagement rather than protest and conflict. Now, which is surprising. I mean, clearly a lot of people have come and talked to us about the Vamco site. A lot of people have come and talked to us about other development projects in the square, you know, the landscape project for Riverside Square, some of the community block grant development proposals we've weighed in on, and we've provided feedback when they relate to Riverside Square. So we're often involved, and in this case, we as an organization had no idea that they were, you know, deconstructing these, tearing down these buildings, and you know, in terms of the big picture, what the plan is for what we're moving forward with. There have been a couple community meetings, and I think people have weighed in, which is great, but you know, it was far from representing our whole community. And I think that's important when you think about how diverse Riverside is, especially in terms of socioeconomic status. Like, you know, you talked about before, you know, having a community where people can walk, where people can come together, you know, is important. It's important for bringing people from different walks of life, bringing people where you don't necessarily need you know, transportation. You can come out and join with neighbors. Your family can come out, get to a playground, things like that. Like that's one of the things that makes Riverside great. You know, our parks are accessible. We have so much right in this area. It's really important that we help to, you know, continue to really preserve it.